I valued emotional safety and emotional curriculum more than I valued instructional curriculum and academics, because I found out very quickly if I can create a safe environment, kids will take risks academically and they will feel safer to lean into things. And that's exactly what happened in my classroom. So I am fairly certain that teaching kindergarten has taught me everything I need to know about coaching adults, about creating safe spaces for all people, and how to structure things, how to bring interest into teaching. Like there's an amazing concept in education called rigor and relevance, which means if you make information relevant to people, they'll put the work in. Welcome to Grow with Robin Breckenridge, a podcast about stepping into the most fully expressed, aligned, and conscious version of yourself. Here, we dive into the real work of personal growth, establishing boundaries, understanding your patterns, building self-trust, healing emotional wounds, and creating relationships that feel safe, authentic, and fulfilling. I'm Robin, a life and relationship coach, and in each episode, we'll explore the tools, insights, and conversations that will help you not just improve your life and relationships, but truly transform them. You don't have to just go through it. Let's grow through it, and let's do it together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're going to do something different. Over the past year or so of this podcast, we have had many listeners send in questions that they'd like me to answer about my own life, my work, things that have shaped me as a coach, general questions about relationships and healing. And I will tell you, it is a little out of my comfort zone. I am normally the one asking questions on this platform. And to be honest, that is a much more comfortable place for me to be. I am a teacher. I love to teach. I do not love talking about myself. So, as I lovingly encourage you guys to step out of your comfort zone, I'm going to do the same today. So today is not going to be a super long episode because I can't talk about myself for 45 minutes. No, thank you. But I am going to answer some of the questions that we've received over the course of doing this podcast. Some of them are personal questions, questions about coaching, my background, general questions about relationships and healing. So my beautiful, lovely assistant, Beth, thought it would be fun to sit down and answer some of the questions that have come our way. And I know that at the end of every guest episode, I ask all of the guests the same series of 5 questions. So I'm going to answer those myself. Now, I have not studied up on these questions. I'm taking them off the cuff and I'm going to answer them as honestly and succinctly as I can. Okay, so I had my assistant put them into categories. So the first part of the questions is about spiritual connection and intuition. Here's question number 1. You often talk about intuition and being guided by something greater than ourselves. What role do intuition and guidance from a higher intelligence play in your work as a coach? Ooh, okay. I think that it plays the biggest role in my work as a coach. It is sometimes hard for me to articulate and describe it. I do not believe that I am psychic. I'm not a medium. I can't talk to dead people. None of that. I do, however, rely on something internally to help guide me in the work. And I tell everybody that I coach more from my body than my brain. In fact, the more I'm in my head, the less dynamic of a coach I am. So I tend to connect to people's energy first. I've changed up how I do my consults now just because we live in a very video conference, Zoom world. But previous to that being the norm, I think now people feel more comfortable to hop on Zoom and see me in person right away. But previous to that, even when Zoom was a thing, I did my consultations via phone. And the reason that I did that is that I did not want to know anything about the person that was coming to me. And that includes that when people would refer a loved one, or if I had a professional referral come my way, sometimes people would want to give me a bio, and I would just say, please don't tell me anything about this person. I don't want my brain involved in it. And I would really just tune in to that person's energy and their patterns. And just tuning into that, my guidance would kick in. And it basically tells me, and this is why I say use a loosely based process, because I do have pillars and curriculum and exercises that I use. There is no one straight path that I take people through. I truly kind of lean into their energy. And then my inner guidance helps me know which is the place to start, what is the follow-up, what is the growing edge. And I don't believe it has ever steered me wrong, ever. In fact, there are some stories or some things that have come out of my mouth in this work where as it's coming out or after, I go, why did I just say that? Like, for instance, I remember this was when I was coaching before I ever went out on my own, and I was coaching over the phone, and I was talking to this client because this is pre-Zoom. And for some reason, my analogies that I was using to teach or land something all had to do with ballerinas. And I've never danced. I've never done ballet. And after it came out, I said, well, I don't even know why I'm doing that particular, like why I'm talking about ballerinas. And it came back that her inner child was a ballerina, and that was her life. She loved to dance. She loved ballet. And so somehow whatever I'm working with helped me or guided me to use an example or an analogy that worked for this person. And I had another instance where I had a client, and I could see this is so hard to explain, and at the risk of sounding crazy on a podcast, I was envisioning what he was talking about, kind of going in and out of alignment as a shoulder going in and out of the socket. And I just know now, I have learned to just unapologetically trust it, even if it makes no sense to me. And so I explained to him, I'm seeing what you're describing as going in and out of alignment, and it's showing me a shoulder going in and out of the socket. And he said, oh my gosh, like last year, my shoulder was going in and out of the socket, and I had to get a surgery done to, keep my shoulder in place. So again, strange coincidence, no clue why I've never had any shoulder issues. I'm not even aware of that type of medical challenge, but it showed me it in a visual, and, I just went with it. And I think it was confirmation for both of us that it is not two people in a Zoom room working on, emotional health and personal development, that there is something bigger than us that is a part of this work. And I fully believe that anyone who comes through my door, my Zoom room, has been anointed and chosen to wake up. And I can tell you that even my wait list stories of people, waiting on my wait list for a year, and I call them and it happens to be the week that their boyfriend broke up with them, and no greater time to need this work or me and my support. I have no idea how that many coincidences can happen. So I have learned over the course of me being a coach to unapologetically trust that guidance. I unapologetically trust it in my own life, and it has never steered me wrong. So I can't even articulate what it is. I call it the universe. I'm not really sure, but there's something bigger at play here. And I think it is obvious and apparent to everybody that comes into this work with me. And I wish I could articulate it better, but I would say that most of what makes me an exceptional coach, I have learned how to work in unison with something that knows way more than I do and is highly, highly intelligent. So I like to call that God or the universe, but I would tell you that I don't even think I could do this work or do it with the level of effectiveness that happens without trusting something bigger than me and realizing that it is a co-creative process, even in this work. So next question. Have there been moments during coaching sessions when you felt guidance come through in a way that surprised you? Would you share one or two stories? I could write a book. I could write a lengthy book about the way things have come through in sessions or the timing of things that have absolutely surprised me. Handful of stories that come to mind. One, I had a client who we were working on her parts of self-work, which is a lot of times when a lot of weird things will start to happen. I've had people that were working on their inner teenager and they don't really remember that time, or they lost, I had one girl that lost all her pictures. I think there was like a house fire or something, because one of the asks I have people do is to find a picture of themselves as a child or a teenager. And she said, I don't have any pictures to send you or to put up in my house. And that week after that session, someone from her high school called her and said, I found all these old pictures and I saw all these pictures of you and I wanted to reach out and reconnect, and sent her all of these pictures electronically. That's weird, right? Like, okay, you literally have no pictures of yourself. And the 1 week that I request a picture of you as a teenager, something orchestrates you getting those pictures. I've definitely had people who have had relatives or old friends from that time period reach out within that week. There is one standout story that I don't think I could ever forget, where I had a client, we were working with each other for a while and we were getting to that parts of self work where we were going back into her inner child and her inner teenager and what she had been through at that time of her life. And, you know, much like a lot of people, unfortunately, she had been sexually abused as a child. There was a local business that would have a lot of the kids hang out there, and the person that owned that business was abusing the children. And she had told her parents at one point, and the parents didn't believe her. And this person was never brought to justice, and she moved on with her life. And that came up in our work. And we talked about it. Obviously, it was a wound. And then she came back the next session and said, you will never believe what happened this week. She said that the person that had abused her, who she had not seen or talked to in 17 years, reached out to her on Facebook and just said, hey, how are you? You know, saw you on here, wanted to say hello. And she brought that to me and said, I'm really upset. I'd like to tell this guy, like, you sexually abused me and you need to come clean with it and you need to own it. And we had a whole conversation about it. That wouldn't have been a wrong choice. But because she had had so many experiences in her life where she told the truth to people who were not equipped to handle that truth or believe her, and she was invalidated. So we talked about it and we got curious, like, what is the likelihood that this person who's reaching out to you on Facebook, like nothing ever happened, is going to, in writing, write you back and say, oh yeah, I did that. Like, sorry about that. You know, there's a higher likelihood that that person is going to deny it, gaslight this person, and then her inner child is back in the same position. So I suggested, and again, no right or wrong, she could have written him and expressed whatever she needed to express, but I encouraged her to think about maybe this time she could believe herself, she could protect herself, and that this guy could never have access to her again. She left the session, she thought about it, she came back to the next session and she said, I blocked him, I deleted him, and that guy never gets to have access to me ever again. And it was this opportunity to be empowered and set a boundary instead of bring what happened to someone who was most likely going to deny it and dismiss it and gaslight. The coincidental nature of someone reaching out after 17 years, again, is something that to me is evidence of something bigger orchestrating a healing process where this person came back into her life and she got to choose differently from her more conscious adult. That's a huge story that I will never forget. Again, I could write a book on how many experiences I've had where I'm watching literal magic take place and the universe orchestrate things that neither myself nor that person could do on their own. So I have hundreds, if not more, stories where unexplainable things happen and they all seem to be where unexplained things happen and they all seem to be orchestrated for the client's highest good. Another question. Looking back on your own life, what are some moments when you felt unmistakably guided towards your path? I believe that everything that ever happened to me, anything that I ever did, was all building and coming together to have me do this work. I remember I was probably about 16 years old, and I have no clue why I would remember this one thought, this one day, but I remembered feeling a longing towards wisdom. Like I wanted to have those one-liners and I wanted to have these great sayings and I didn't. And it felt like something was missing in my life. And I remember at the time going, well, you're only 16 years old. Like maybe you're going to get some wisdom along the way. So oddly enough, I feel like my soul knew what was coming my way because one-liners or sayings, phrases, quotes, oh, I got too many to count now. But I think my soul knew what was coming my way and that I didn't have it yet, but that it was something that I needed in this life. I also believe that every single step of my life, the right teacher emerged, whether that was a positive or negative experience. I believe every relationship was preparing me to either hold space or work on the things that could not go with me, the belief systems, the insecurities, the patterns. Everything was leading me to holding space for other people. So I don't even know that I could single out a few moments where I felt unmistakably guided. I don't know that there was ever a time that I wasn't guided. It doesn't mean I always felt guided. There's been plenty of times that I feel or have felt lost. I think that anybody who goes through transition meaning I'm not who I used to be, I'm not yet the well-practiced newer version of me, feels lost. I do believe that through my own spiritual pursuits, I have always, at least somewhere along the journey, leaned into what is this here to teach me? You know what, as I'm saying this, I would say maybe the biggest moment where I felt unmistakably guided was when I started working with Mike Morris. I believe the universe sent me an angel and that he was exactly what I needed. And there are so many moments like that. He's one of my faves. He's one of my favorite teachers, beings that came into my life, and the level of guidance that he brought in, it really truly makes me so grateful that I get to pay that forward and be that for so many people through this work. Okay, next question. Many people experience seasons when they desperately want guidance, but hear only silence. Have you experienced that? What did you do? And what would you recommend to someone who feels disconnected from guidance? Absolutely. I've felt disconnected from guidance. I have, oh goodness, for a majority of my life, felt the calling to change, but had no idea how to do it. So in my experience, I continued to seek out answers and I continued to seek out help. I say that my Google searches are divinely guided, but I'm just a naturally inquisitive person. So Google has always been something that I've brought a lot of interests to. So I also have had a very hard time with pain. I know that that's different for everybody. My pain tends to be pretty intense. And, you know, of course, I'm born in the Cancer zodiac sign. And I think I have like a bunch of houses in Cancer, whatever that means. But clearly I'm a deep feeler and I feel things strongly and intensely. So that is kind of the gift of an anxious attachment, is that we are very aware that our feelings are on fire and we will get into action to do something about it. So I believe probably one of the greatest things that I leaned on in times that I was lost or did not feel super connected to my own inner guidance or the guidance of the universe was to get curious and to just literally dust off every single time you fall down. I had this really neat opportunity to work in a juvenile justice center, which is juvie, or it is jail for incarcerated adolescents. And I had this amazing group of kids that were probably thriving and safer being in jail than in their own homes, because there was predictability in jail. And I would like to say people were nice. The one that I worked in, people were nice. The guards were nice. The teachers were nice. But a lot of people don't realize that a juvenile justice center is, at least in the state of Michigan, I can't say for sure that this is true everywhere. It is considered a self-contained, emotionally impaired building, that when you go into jail, you automatically get an IEP, which is an individualized education plan, which means that you qualify for special education services in the domain of emotional impairment. And when you go to jail, you have to go to school year round. So I taught geometry, which laughable when I found out that I was going to do my practicum for that particular part of my master's degree in jail. I was more afraid of teaching geometry than working in jail. I had to go to a info training, and they told us not to wear earrings, not to wear scarves because we could be choked and killed, and not to carry pencils on you, all of these things. And then they told me I was teaching geometry, and I left and I called my mom crying, and she goes, "Oh no, how bad is it?" I go, "They want me to teach geometry." So let me tell you, every day I might go to jail before I want to teach geometry ever again. And those poor kids, I did my best. I don't know that any of them are going to be doing some serious geometry out there in the world. I don't know that I was the best at teaching geometry, but I tried. But when I left my position, I wrote every single kid a personalized card. And in it, I found a Chinese proverb that said, "Fall down 7, get up 8." And I was hoping to impart to those kids that it doesn't matter how many times you screw up. It doesn't matter how many times you fall down, get back up. And that's been my motto as well. So I do fall down. I still fall down. I still fall down into old patterns. I can still fall down into depressive thinking, anxiety, all of the old haunts that are in my nervous system. I just commit to, when it's available to me, to dust off and get back up. And that is ultimately what the work that I do is meant to do for people. Like, I can't prohibit people from falling down or going back into old patterns or, going into old parts of self. But I can help you, and this curriculum can help you dust off and get back up faster. So the number one thing that has helped me at times where I feel lost and I feel disconnected from my guidance is to get curious and to know that every single time I fall down or repeat a pattern, there is a new moment where I can choose to get back up and try again. Next question. Are there practices that help you strengthen your connection to intuition or spirit? Yes, sure. I love learning and seeking and growing. So there's a new practice that I just brought into my life. I took a cohort, breathwork cohort. It's called 9D breathwork. I absolutely loved it, like almost like to an obsessive place. I love it. And I did it 3 times a week for a month. It was incredible. It was incredible for nervous system regulation, perimenopause symptoms. I could not believe the amount of intuitive downloads I got doing that. So one, I like to continue to have a growing edge in spiritual practices and learn more. I've always loved learning about religion and theology. I actually wanted to, my freshman year of college, I wanted to major in fashion and minor in theology, which just kind of gives you a little glimpse into the complexity that is in me. I ended up going into teaching and did not go into either, but I love learning about different religions, different spiritual beliefs and practices, because what I see is at the core, most of it is the same. And it's just something that is interesting to me. So I love learning about different spiritual practices. I do have some favorite spiritual teachers that I love to connect and reconnect to their work. A few that I can name offhand is Dr. Wayne Dyer, Marianne Williamson, Byron Katie, Eckhart Tolle, Carolyn Mays, Louise Hay, Elizabeth Gilbert, Tara Brach, Gabor Mate, although not necessarily a spiritual teacher. Holy smokes, if his stuff isn't spiritual, I don't know. Those are just a few off the top of my head. I feel like I'm missing a bunch. Michael Bernard Beckwith. Oh, I mean, there's so many. And there's so much beautiful information on YouTube. Dr. Wayne Dyer is just one of my all-time favorites. I feel like every time I reconnect to his work, I just feel more high vibrational. I also love to either in person or online tune into spiritual communities that help lift me up. And then as a daily practice, I read The Language of Letting Go by Melody Beattie, even though, again, that's a book a little bit more directed towards codependency and recovery, both from substances and emotional recovery. I feel like it is higher vibrational text. So I try also, this is one that I hope people are inspired by and try, as someone who is deeply empathetic in this world and carries a lot of empathy to the point where sometimes it can feel a little bit like a curse. Like when I see people who are homeless on the street, it's hard for me to shake that. If I see an animal that is dead on the side of the road, it's hard for me to shake it. Just things that I'm truly powerless to. And so I came up with an idea that every night I would pray for 5 people. It one felt like it gave me something to do with the powerlessness, like I could surrender and turn it over to God. And the other is it just felt like something positive to do. And typically I think I would pray for myself, and I do. I still pray for myself every day because that girl matters too. But I got into the habit of praying for 5 people every day, and it became somewhat of a game. Like I would see something that was unfortunate, or I would talk to someone who was going through cancer, or their loved one was sick or compromised. And I would ask them, would you mind if I pray for you? I pray for 5 people every night. And I started to see people light up and really feel considered and loved by that statement. So then when I see things maybe that I feel powerless or that my empathy really kicks in, I go, oh, okay, I'm going to pray for that person tonight. So it makes me feel like I'm doing something. And another huge practice that I probably do daily, I could probably do it even more, is the practice of surrender, where when I truly am powerless over something or I'm in an internal battle around it and I'm not getting anywhere, that it's a really good time for me to surrender that over to that which has power. So to me, that would be the universe, God. And there are some times where I might go, fine, if I can't have this thing or it's not going to work out, you have it. I'm not telling you that I am zen every time I'm surrendering something over, but I love the definition of surrender to mean giving over, not giving up. So that means giving over to the thing that has the most power. And I truly believe that we are in a co-creative process with something bigger than us. And I probably, out of any practice I have ever done in my entire life, I see more results and faster results with surrender than anything. The minute I stop resisting it and I hand it over and I work on grieving it and letting it go the way that I think it should come into my life, typically there is some sort of movement that comes in. Okay, next round of questions: education, training, and becoming a coach. In one of the early podcast episodes, you shared that you earned degrees in education and worked with emotionally impaired children and teens. Looking back, were there moments in those roles when your intuition helped you understand or support a child in ways that traditional training couldn't? Okay, well, that's an interesting question. Much like in coaching, I relied on my intuition in teaching as well. And again, this sounds a little bit strange, but I did not ever think someone had, I have 2 certifications, one in specific learning disability and the other in emotional impairment. And then of course, because I had a large bandwidth for kids that had severe behavioral problems, and I believe at that time I was the only teacher in the building teaching in general education that had a special education background. So kids that had specific special needs or learning challenges would usually be put in my room. And I just felt what those things felt like. I never thought, oh, this kid has ADD. I felt what ADHD felt like in the child. Specifically, there was one time I had a student that I got the opportunity to go to dinner with 2 years ago. And I just love this kid still to this day, even though he is technically now an adult. I believe he's 18 years old. But I had a student that his mom was murdered 2 months before he came into my classroom. And he came from a really, really dysfunctional family system. And his mother was a sex worker and an addict. And while out as a sex worker, was murdered. And I just happened to overhear this child because no one told me. But I heard him in the kitchen playing the play kitchen, because I taught kindergarten, and he was playing with the other kids. And he said, and I quote, "My mom got her face ripped off and died." And it caught my attention, and I brought him over. And what I found out was that that was accurate information, and that was actually what happened. His mother was beaten so badly that essentially she did not have a face, which is just horrible information, and horrible information to hear out of a 5-year-old. So I did some research, and obviously this kid had been through a ton of trauma. And when I got him, he was not domesticated, is all I can tell you. I mean, it was very similar to taming a wild animal. And what I knew, and obviously this is before I did any of this work, is that I needed to be consistent, non-reactive, and safe, and that I needed to earn this child's trust and love, and that he was going to probably try to push every button, anything that he could to prove that I was, and of course this is unconscious, but to prove that I was like everybody else in his environment. And I stayed really, really steady with him. And I ended up having him for 2 years because he was born crack addicted and had alcohol exposure in utero. He was very, very small, probably about half the size of the other students. And because of the emotional challenges and the trauma, repeating kindergarten one more year was the kindest choice for him in his academic journey. So I ended up having this child twice, and I absolutely fell in love with him. But he had a lot of sensory issues. He had a lot of learning issues. He had a ton of behavior issues. And there was one day where things were going really well in the classroom and we were really making strides behaviorally. He was doing great. And one day he was just off. He seemed really reactive. He just seemed uncomfortable in his skin. And I was really getting curious with a lot of different things. And I'm kind of going through going, well, that's not what it is. And that's not what it is. And then something hit me. And again, I can't really explain it as anything other than intuition. And I asked him, I go, come over here for a second. And I just took his shirt, the back of his shirt, and I popped it open. And there was a tag, and it was a big tag. And it must have been rubbing against his skin. And because he was so sensitive to sensory input, I just said, hey, is this tag bothering you? And I don't even think it was in his awareness. I think he was like, yeah, I guess maybe, and I cut the tag and he was okay for the rest of the day. That was just an example of how like thinking out of the box as a teacher helped me to form stronger connections with the kids. And because of teaching kids that had really challenging behaviors, it taught me that it wasn't about being a better disciplinarian. It wasn't even about strengthening my classroom management, which was an important part of that role. It was about creating safety. It was about no matter how activated, how tired, because when I was teaching, I had a small child at that time, and I know that I wasn't necessarily always getting sleep, but it was about finding a way to stay consistent and safe. And when I valued that the most out of anything, including academics, like I'm not getting paid by the public school system anymore, so I can say that I valued emotional safety and emotional curriculum more than I valued instructional curriculum and academics, because I found out very quickly if I can create a safe environment, kids will take risks academically and they will feel safer to lean into things. And that's exactly what happened in my classroom. So I am fairly certain that teaching kindergarten has taught me everything I need to know about coaching adults, about creating safe spaces for all people, and how to structure things, how to bring interest into teaching. Like there's an amazing concept in education called rigor and relevance, which means if you make information relevant to people, they'll put the work in. It also taught me that we are all 6-year-olds inside, and that we all need support both socially and in our learning in life. It taught me that mistakes are probably the absolute best teacher in life. And I say mistakes in quotations because I'm not even sure they're mistakes. I think they're just learning opportunities. It taught me everything. I am so grateful to those kids. I am so grateful for that time. And to go back to like looking back on your life from a higher vantage point in that climbing up the mountain analogy. Oh my gosh, like I wouldn't, there's no way I'd be doing this for a living, and there's no way I'd be as effective as I am had I not had every single experience in that school, period, end of story. So I am so grateful for that time in my life. And I think back on those kids and I'm so blessed and grateful. I just went to a graduation party for one of my students that just graduated high school. And some of them follow me on Instagram and they'll write me, Miss B, I see you on Instagram. I found you. It's just such a beautiful, I will always be deeply connected to them, and I will always be deeply connected to that time. And I know that that time it taught me more than any master's degree that I could have taken. So the next question is, how did those experiences shape the way you coach today? Well, whoever asked it, I think I just answered it. It taught me everything. Of course, I've taken so many trainings as a coach and I've learned all types of modalities. And there was a big shift for me going from teaching kids and adolescents to teaching adults. In fact, I was terrified because sometimes kids are a little bit more forgiving, especially young kids. They tend to like you. And I love working with adults. I love that I'm still working with the 6-year-old and every single one of you and every one of my clients. So have I ever truly left kindergarten? No. My other experiences in working with kids that had emotional impairments, guess what, y'all? I think we all might have a little bit of emotional impairment if we're here listening to this podcast and doing this work. So I also have not left that realm of teaching. And the other part, the specific learning disability part, just really taught me how to take information and make it as simplified and succinct as I can. And it's really fun for me. I love doing that. It's how my brain works as well. I think also growing up neurodivergent, I've had ADHD my whole life. My brain works differently. And being able to learn systems. That's why I'm such a huge fan of systems in this work and writing things down, because in my own journey in therapy, we would have some really amazing like breakthroughs and ahas. And then 2 days later, I would not remember any of them, or I would get activated. And that's the first stuff that's going to go. I'm like, I don't even know. I've been in therapy for 15 years, but I don't know anything. So one, I integrated the kindergarten teacher in me and the teacher in me and said, why are we not writing these things down so we can come back and access them? And the other part is I could not function without systems, period. That's just how my ADHD works. So I've always been a huge fan of systems. And I think that it's so applicable when we're talking about emotions, because emotions are big, they're messy, they're confusing. They're a language all on their own that we've not been taught how to speak. So being able to put them into simplified structures doesn't alleviate them from being challenging. I've yet to figure out how to do that and completely crack that code, but it does help you be able to put them into a structure. And I think it makes it easier to step into them. I think it makes it easier to understand. So again, my background in all types of teaching that I've done and all of the experiences working with kids has pretty much been the biggest influencer of being able to be a coach today. Okay, part 3. I'm doing okay, guys. Whew. Parenting the inner teenager. Okay, so this question says, many people talk about the inner child, but the inner teenager can be just as challenging. Sometimes my inner teen gets stuck in resentment, hopelessness, or teenage angst. It's difficult to shift into my grounded, conscious adult. Often the best I can do is imagine what an attuned parent might say, but my inner teen immediately dismisses it as out of touch or unhelpful. How do we effectively parent that teenage part of ourselves? Okay, so I wish there was a general solve for that. Obviously, everybody's inner teenager is different. Everyone's protest behavior within that teenager can be different. And there's a lot of nuances that go into that question that depends on the individual. But to answer that in a more general way, what I would say is that in this particular example, you have to build trust with your parts of self. You have to build trust with yourself. And for most of us, we have made promises to ourselves that we have not kept. We have looked at wounded parts of us as a pain in the ass that we need to get rid of. we have told those parts like, hey, maybe they're telling us in some way, maybe it's through our nervous system, I don't feel safe, I don't feel comfortable around this person. And they're like, hey, shut up. We need this person's approval or affection or attention. So be quiet. These are all things that if we did to a friend would not build trust. So first and foremost, I told a story in here a couple times of a long time ago when I did a meditation and we were to find our inner child. And this is interchangeable to my teenager too. And we're supposed to take their hand and say, I'm here for you now. I'm going to take care of you. And my inner teenager said, oh God, not you. That was resistance on the part of my inner child. Why? Because my inner child did not trust me. There was so much evidence that I had that I did not have her back, that I did not know how to adequately parent her or protect her, and that I was not exercising that. So instead of being like, hey, trust me, I said, okay, you're right. I'm going to keep trying. I'm probably going to mess up, but I promise you every time I mess up, I'm going to keep trying. Now, the way that I showed that through my behavior and not just my words was I started writing down goals in the 6 areas of self-care every day. I started making sure that she was taken care of. I started to really get curious around times I was activated, mad, felt victimized in my life. And I looked at them as opportunities to have boundaries. I started listening to those parts of self. I'm not sure if I've communicated this or not on the podcast because it's been a minute since we talked about inner teenagers, but I hated my inner teenager in the beginning of my work. She was the problem. She was the one that was a little bit out of control and caused a lot of shame and problems in my life. And I wanted her gone. And it's not about eliminating these parts of self. It's about learning to love them. So over time, I had to realize that a 14-year-old version of me or a 15 or a 16-year-old version, now that I'm 45 years old, is a child. I was never looking at my teenager as a child because she was doing some grown stuff and she wasn't all that innocent and vulnerable from my memory of her. She seemed kind of grown. I was not grown at 14 years old. I was not grown at 16 years old. I mean, I don't even know if I was grown in my early 20s. No, I wasn't. Okay. So when I was able to be around another 14-year-old and see the innocence, I was like, oh my gosh, that chick that was going to the bars with a fake ID and running around doing whatever, that was a kid. And that was a kid that might have been going through some things that she wasn't even aware of and definitely did not have the means to get the right type of support for it. So the first thing is we want to look at that teenager not as this beast or this part that we need to get rid of or this complication in our story and get more curious as to why there is that level of resistance up. What I know about resistance is protection. So that would indicate to me, based off that question, that your teenager is still protecting herself from you. And so really great ways that we start, and these are those are the micro ways that build to greater, bigger places of trust, is to keep a promise to yourself once a week. Forgive yourself. Start a practice of forgiveness where you forgive that girl for the things that she did or the ways that she operated because she was doing the best she could with the information, consciousness, and awareness she had at the time. But start keeping some promises to her, just like we would in a relationship with someone else. What are the things that develop trust in external relationships in our life? Consistency, follow through, words and actions aligning, kind talk, being non-judgmental. These are the things that we want to put into practice as often as we can. Still to this day, there are times where I drop something or I make a mistake and I go, oh, you idiot. And I will, either internally or externally. And I'm not perfect. I try to say, hey, you don't get to talk to me like that. Or, oh my gosh, that was mean. I just made a mistake. I'm allowed to make mistakes. So I'm very aware of the way that I'm talking to myself so that those parts of self feel safer and can lean into trusting my leadership as a conscious adult. Okay, next question. When I use AVPS with my teenage self, ooh, these teenagers are hard to manage, aren't they sometimes? She often has no idea what would actually feel supportive. So remember, AVPS is acknowledge, validate, permit, support. It can feel like nothing will make things better. At the same time, I can't simply permit behaviors like staying in bed all day. How do we balance compassion with healthy limits when working with that part of ourselves? Okay, so we will always be called to self-parent. I had a really adorable client at one point that was going through a really, really hard time. And we needed to really up kind of keeping him busy and occupied and putting his energy in things that were purpose driven. So he was at my office and he said, I don't know what to do with myself. Like I'm kind of crawling out of my skin. And I said, hey, is there anything that you've ever wanted to do that you haven't done yet? He said, I've always wanted to paint, but I've never done it. And I said, okay, well, I used to be a teacher. I know Michael's, the craft store, often has sales on canvases. Go run and get yourself some on the way home. Try painting this week. Come back. Let me know what kind of data and information we have. So he comes back the next week and he goes, great. Now all I want to do is paint. I love it so much. I don't want to go to work. I don't want to hang out with my friends. I just want to paint. And my response to him was, well, this is so exciting. I'm so glad you found something that you love to do. And we need to parent that part, right? That part can paint and still needs to go to work. That part can paint and still bring in balance in your life. One thing that's true is that once we start to trust ourselves a little bit more and we start to look at our parts of self, sometimes there is a dental floss line between something that was a maladaptive pattern and something that is self-care or kind. So if you have a teenager who probably, given what's written in this question, might be going through something, I think that it's okay to meet them in the middle and say, hey, let's give you some time to just binge or sit in front of Netflix and chill, and we'll take everything off your schedule. But let's put some parameters around it, because that's what we would do with a physical child if we were parenting. We would say, hey, you get 2 hours of television, have at it, watch whatever you want. And we're going to do one purpose-driven action too. Maybe that's going for a walk. What is a purpose-driven action? It means that it is contributing to the life we want to build or live in. Maybe it is doing something actionable that's stepping towards a goal. But I would bring in the option to do both and then have a boundary with yourself or with that part of self. The next part would be having a healthy relationship with your inner child. For someone who has experienced a painful or traumatic childhood, it can be incredibly difficult to connect with or even want to care for their inner child. Sometimes that younger self feels like a reminder of the overwhelming pain rather than someone we naturally want to nurture. How do you begin cultivating compassion for your inner child when your early experiences taught you to reject or abandon yourself? I think this is probably more relatable than not. I also think what's relatable is sometimes we can't remember our childhood because we had a certain level of dissociation to keep us safe and keep us going. So I know that sometimes it can be hard. People come into this work and say, like, I don't even remember my childhood, or I don't remember specific times of my life. So it makes me think of a guest that I had on the podcast. Her name is Michelle Peters. I can't remember which episode she was, but I want to say she was around maybe my 5th or 6th guest. And one of the reasons that I had her on the podcast was because when we started the work on parts of self and working with her inner child, and I gave her the invitation I give everybody, which is to find a picture of yourself as a little kid and put it up somewhere so we can start to develop a relationship. She told me that she did not like her inner child, that she was gross. And as I'm saying it, I have compassion for that part of her. And I'm not going to go into specifics, but she did not like this child and one of the reasons was because this child was so neglected. And her experience was that she was different and taken care of physically different than the other kids in her class. And so she had a lot of shame in that part of self. And she wanted to get rid of that part and she didn't like her. And what she was doing was she was ultimately doing what was done to her, which was she was mistreating, not prioritizing, neglecting, and abusing that little girl all over again. And so we ended up settling on more of a younger or baby picture for her to put up. And over time, she was able to see the innocence of that little girl, and sometimes with my help too. So number one, if it's hard to establish a relationship with your inner child, and it's hard to move through the trauma and the experiences, I would definitely not do it alone. I would find a professional that specializes in developmental psychology, parts of self-work, inner child work, and have someone help lead you into a relationship with that part of self in a way that's safe and safely paced for you. Also, I would go be around kids. I do not think that there is a decent human being that would ever go around kids and say, oh, well, they're cute, so they're worthy, or their grades are good, so they're worthy. Kids are just inherently worthy. And I love kids personally. I know that's not what's shared, or not everybody likes kids, and you're entitled to your own opinions, but kids are innocent, powerless, little balls of creativity and fun and passion. And the world has not taught them that there's something wrong with them. They're not as attuned to their shame. They're not conditioned by society. And they are just some of the most lovely human beings to be around. So I would highly encourage you to go be around a child or kids that are around the age that you have some resistance around. And it would be you'd be pretty hard pressed to not feel some level of compassion for what that version of you was carrying at that age. When we go through the work that I do with parts of self, and I ask people, like, what are the challenging feelings you remember feeling? And people say, terrified, not good enough, angry, neglected, invisible. How can you think of a 6-year-old who did not have, for some of us, I know there's people younger listening to this podcast, but like, I didn't have the internet when I was a kid. I couldn't go to ChatGPT and ask, what was going on in my environment. There were not readily available self-help books like in people's bookshelves that I could just grab. I remember being a nanny at one point, and I picked up a Dr. Phil book, and that was the first kind of self-help book. And I don't like to put people's work down in here. That is not a teacher that I would learn from currently. So I'm like, I got a little compassion for the poor part of me that was getting advice through the voice of Dr. Phil. But we didn't have therapy. We didn't have people we could talk to. We didn't have us that would take us to a life coach or to Barnes and Noble to find a book on that particular thing. So that in itself, when I read back the way people were feeling at that time of their life, it's really hard to not have compassion that a 6-year-old, like I know that for myself, some of the things that I was managing when I was younger, if I had to manage them now with all the tools and resources and information and wisdom I have on board, it would be almost intolerable. Like, I don't know how I did it. And I think I actually do know how I did. I think we survived through our survival patterns. So those parts of us are the parts that we can have the most amount of grace and gratitude, because without them and without their adaptive strategies, we wouldn't be here and we wouldn't be who we are. So I guess my two strongest suggestions would be, don't do this work alone. It's really great to have a professional to help you through it, especially if there's a lot of trauma in your parts of self. 2, go be around a kid that age. Sometimes the universe will just bring it in coincidentally or not coincidentally, but you will see the innocence in children, even teenagers. And when you kind of factor in what you have been through, I think that it's a lot easier to shift into compassion for those parts of self. Okay, our last part of the questions are around dating and relationships. I've experienced two opposite relationship patterns. When there is strong chemistry and attraction, I tend to overlook important incompatibilities and compromise far more than I should. But I've also stayed for years in relationships where our lifestyles, personalities, and values aligned well. Yet I longed for more affection and emotional intimacy. I kept hoping those things would grow over time, but they never did. How do we discern the difference between giving a relationship enough time to develop and settling for something that isn't truly fulfilling? Okay, again, loaded question that has a lot of individual nuance depending on the relationship, what's compatible, what's not, your background, your history, your attachment styles, but to address it in a general way. So I guess the way I would answer that question is probably three parts. One, we want to collect data. So I am a big fan of taking a journal out, especially in the beginning of a relationship, and taking daily notes about how you're feeling in the relationship and what seems to be working and what doesn't. When we do that consistently, what you're able to usually see is patterns. Now, we do live in a ChatGPT world now. So ChatGPT is something you could take those notes to, and maybe Chat could help you find some patterns. Or if you have a therapist or a coach, that person can often help you be able to see some patterns in the relationship. So one, I would be really diligent about collecting data for yourself and looking for patterns of things that are working, that are not working. Is this something that's consistently showing up, consistently activating you? Also, I think clarity is really, really important. So I do an exercise in my work that I call conscious dating. Sometimes I do it with people that aren't even actively dating because it's less necessarily about getting into action and more about getting clear on what it is you want. So again, big fan of systems, and I like to use systems more than once if possible. So I know that I taught you guys in the very beginning of this podcast about the 6 different areas of self-care: physical, emotional, social, spiritual, financial, intellectual. Okay. That means that we are taking care of ourselves in each one of those areas. And that's a way to comprehensively or holistically meet your needs within relationship to yourself. What's so cool about that system is that we can also use it for dating and we can also use it for compatibility. Okay. So one, we want to look at from those 6 different areas, what do you want in a partner? And I'm going to do more episodes on dating. So we will go into that a little bit more specifically in future episodes. But generally speaking, I would say, like, what are you looking for in a partner from an emotional perspective, an intellectual perspective? Intellectual is really important because that's when we are out to dinner and we see couples that are sitting there on their phones the whole dinner, are not saying anything to themselves or to each other because there is no intellectual compatibility. We don't have similar interests, hobbies, things like that. So like that is a really important one for sustainability. But again, I'm going to go into this further detail in the future because I may have talked for 45 minutes after in the beginning of this podcast. I was like, I can't talk about myself for 45 minutes. No way. I might have just proved myself wrong. But clarity is important. So know what you want and a partner from each one of those areas. Know what you're bringing to a relationship in each one of those areas so that we're not just asking for what we want, but we're also checking in with what are we bringing in each one of these areas to a relationship. And then it's really important for you to know your non-negotiables. Non-negotiables mean that you are aware that if these things are present in a relationship dynamic, you will not be safe and you will not be able to attach securely within that relationship. So sometimes there are overt things that we know, like I don't want a liar. I don't want someone who smokes cigarettes if that's something that somebody doesn't want. But often there are things that we are really drawn to, but we know they're not good for us. So maybe if it's like, I don't know, historically, I've dated people who are unemployed and I want to fix and save them and rescue them. Guess what? Maybe we should stop dating people who are unemployed. And that doesn't mean we're being mean. It means that we know it's not in alignment for our nervous system because it's a slippery slope, and we end up stuck in relationships where we're caretaking and we don't feel that financial compatibility or motivational compatibility. So definitely you want to be clear. And that's what consciousness allows us to do, is we are more clear, and then we're able to vet or be discerning in a more aligned way. The third is just this concept between patience and tolerance. Okay. Patience means that somebody might be showing us or giving us information that they're willing to work on something. Like, hey, I really want to work on my anger. And it's not just words. Like, I'm going to go seek out anger management classes, or I'm going to go get a therapist and work specifically on this thing. That is evidence that someone is willing to get into action and change. In those circumstances, and of course, again, this is nuanced. So somebody could also be like, no, I don't have gas in the tank for patience. Okay. But relationships require patience because we're not always growing and expanding at the same rate. Specifically in this work, I'll have people come and do this work, and then they start dating someone, or they're in a partnership and that person has not done this work. And so it's actually loving to allow some space for that partner. Of course, it would require them to be interested and motivated to do it, to go seek out this information and learn and grow themselves. And we can give some space for them to catch up to where you are. But patience is an act of love. It is in the vibration of love, which is a high vibrational energy. Tolerance is in the energy of fear. We tolerate because we're afraid of losing the relationship, afraid of being alone, afraid of, I don't want to go back into the dating pool. We're afraid that men or women or this type of person is a limited resource, and that we could not ask the universe for something like this, but more in alignment. So we tolerate because we are afraid. So I have never, ever, ever coached a single human being to settle in their relationship, because to me, settling would indicate that we have to abandon ourselves, our needs, our values, what we prioritize, what we want. Now, settling and holding space for a partner to grow, settling and being in a repair process with a partner are two different things. So when I'm speaking specifically to settling, which means I know what I want and I'm not getting it, but I'm too afraid to leave this and access the level of courage it would need to find something that is in alignment, I'm never a fan of that. I don't think it ever ends well for anybody, not for the relationship. And that doesn't mean people don't stay in relationships that they're settling, but are they happy? Probably not. Are they getting their needs met? Probably not. Are they probably still in some sort of energetically familiar environment to what they grew up in? Probably. Next question, why does the familiarity of an unsatisfying relationship often feel safer than the uncertainty of being single? Well, there's this illogical thing that happens to us when we experience feelings, because feelings are not logical. And we will draw in what's familiar regardless of merit. I don't think there's anybody that wants to marry a rageaholic, an alcoholic, an abuser, someone who screams at you, someone who neglects you. This is not something that logically anyone would choose. But what happens is that there is a unconscious part of us, a younger part of us that we often don't even know is behind the wheel, that is trying to have a corrective experience through similar energies. So we will often stay stuck in things that are familiar versus safe. This brings up a really great point, and I love to bring in the emotional pain scale, because on the emotional pain scale, 10 being I am in so much pain I want to die, 1 being I'm not in any pain. If we've experienced relational trauma growing up, if we did not feel safe, if there was neglect, if there was emotional neglect, we become used to things that would cause other people pain, enough pain that they would leave. We are used to that pain. Sometimes we're not even aware that it's there. Sometimes we're aware, but we don't even know that we have agency in it. So if we come out of relational trauma growing up, we usually stay at a number 7 on the emotional pain scale. And again, if you were in a level 7 physical pain, you would probably go to the ER or an urgent care facility. Most of us live there internally at a pain of a 7 because it's what's familiar. Leaving that relationship and going and being single or being on your own, what happens with that pain scale is that if we want to go down the pain scale to those lower numbers, we have to elect to feel worse. Why do we have to elect to feel worse? Because we have to walk up to the childhood wounding that has us stuck at the 7 to begin with. Maybe we need to establish a relationship with ourselves, because often the biosphere we live in, the relationship we are in with ourselves is not good. It's not healthy. It's mean. It is not safe. It is not trustworthy. And it feels a whole lot better to be in relationship with other people, even if it's not in alignment, than being in a relationship with ourselves. So maybe we need to learn how to have a relationship with ourselves. Maybe we need to learn how to manage grief. Maybe we need to learn how to manage rejection, loss, abandonment, because I can tell you that even when we choose it, sometimes it feels like abandonment that the other person doesn't beg or plead or pound down our door to come back. And that's something that's activating. But most of us do not know how to be in relationship with ourselves and be happy. So I think that explains a lot of times why we would rather stay in something that's not in alignment, but maybe familiar, than being on our own or single. Also, I do say this often. I think it's true. I think there is piss in the dating pool. Like, I think the technology we have now, there's a lot, it's almost a breeding ground for attachment wounding. And I believe that the universe and God is more powerful than any limitation. I think it's more powerful than the dating apps, than what we perceive as a limitation in dating. I think that you can still find your person on a dating app. I think that you can still find your person off a dating app. But I know that there is an elevated amount of pressure around finding people right now, and finding people who are healthy or interested in being a better version of them. And I will tell you, it is absolutely out there. Last question. What are some signs that we're compromising from a healthy place versus abandoning ourselves? So I'm going to assume this is in relationship with others. And I believe that self-abandonment is sneaky and sometimes really hard to vet out, and something you'll probably be looking for the rest of your life, because most of us have experienced neglect or emotional neglect. And so that would be a baseline and default within us. So I will bring it back to the Byron Katie quote, "A dishonest yes is a no to self." I think that it's important to kind of go back to the basics and know what an authentic yes is and an authentic no is in your body. Once we kind of have that understanding, or a little bit clearer, I think it's easier to know when we are choosing to compromise out of love, because love is a high vibrational energy. There's nothing negative about it. And love sometimes requires us to do the harder thing. Hold your friend's hair when they're barfing. Stay up with your kid all night long when they don't feel good, even though you have to be up at 5 a.m. for a 6 a.m. meeting. Helping someone move because they can't afford movers, whatever it is. Like, I don't know that anybody wants to do those things, but we do them out of service of love. And so sometimes love is doing the harder thing. So in relationships, sometimes we compromise because it's an act of love for our partner. And we might go, like in my case, like, I don't really care about golf. I don't care about hearing about golf. I don't care about golfing, but I can hold space for my partner. Maybe I would golf sometimes. Maybe I would be a little bit more attentive when he's telling me a story about golf, or I might inquire a little bit more about golf so I can understand it. Do I personally care about golf? I don't. That's not to put anybody down. It's just not, I'm just not a sports type of gal. But that is an act of love, and it's an authentic yes for me to act in a loving way. self-abandonment is more an authentic no that I'm trying to make a yes, or that I'm allowing guilt or obligation or responsibility to override me honoring myself. So I hope that answers that question. Okay, so I thought it would be fun to end this episode the same way that I end my conversations with my guests. So today I'm going to answer my own closing questions. These are a little bit harder when you have to do it, but let's do it. I'm going to do it quick. What's a belief about yourself that you've had to unlearn? I have had to unlearn that I am not smart, because if there's anybody out there listening that has ADHD and grew up in the 80s and 90s, specifically in the 80s and 90s when they were not diagnosing girls with ADHD, I thought that my neurodivergency and challenges with my ADHD meant that I was stupid. And to be fair, my ADHD at times is laughable, and there are some funny aspects to it. And it was also a big butt of the joke in my family for me. So I think I interpreted that I was not smart because I had ADHD. And it took me really until my mid-30s to start to own that I am an intelligent person. That intelligence doesn't come in one form. If you put me in front of math curriculum, send the help. You put me in front of emotions, I have an extremely high emotional EQ. So I think that intelligence is different. I think that I love finding the differences of intelligence in different people. Like if you put me in front of a toilet and had me try to fix it, and that was what we valued in society, that like plumbers are the smartest people on the planet, which my gosh, they have to be pretty darn smart. I don't know what to do with a broken toilet. I might be considered, impaired in that regard. I think as a culture, we really put an emphasis on specific types of academics. I know that we have one box of education that we offer people, and we will even medicate kids in order for them to fit in the box instead of expanding education to meet more differences in intelligence and learning styles. So I feel bad for a lot of people and their experiences in the one box of education that we offer. As a teacher, I tried to really kind of stretch that box too. But I, for a very long time, did not think I was smart. And so that is definitely something that I had to unlearn. What's a daily practice that helps you feel connected to yourself? Well, I try to get movement in my day every day because I tend to carry a lot of anxious energy, and anxious energy is something that we have to burn often. So I like to get myself moving. I call it movement, not exercise, because some days it might be weight training and working out with a trainer. Some days it might be walking with a weighted vest. And some days it might be walking my cute little dogs down the street because that's all I got in me. But I try to move every day. I also read my daily devotional, which I mentioned earlier, The Language of Letting Go by Melody Beattie. Melody Beattie has just been a really, really, really beautiful teacher for me. So I have that practice. And then I try to stay diligent about my daily practice of setting goals in those 6 areas daily, even if they're small goals, so that I am intentional about my self-care. What's a piece of advice you once received that changed everything for you? Gosh, I've received so much advice. It's really hard to narrow it down. But if I did narrow it down, I believe hearing that love doesn't hurt was a huge piece of advice that I received. And I believe I heard it for the first time on Oprah. Like if I ever met Oprah, I would just really extend my gratitude for her being in my living room throughout my childhood and adolescence and young adulthood. There were so many things that she introduced me to. I'm really grateful for the bravery that she had in bringing some of the topics that she did to society and the American public. So I heard her once on an episode say that love doesn't hurt. And that wasn't my experience. And I fully believe now that I've studied the energy of feelings that there's actually nothing negative about love, and that love doesn't hurt. And that if love has an undercurrent of pain and hurt in it, it is definitely something that you want to look at. And it probably is related to what we experienced and what was familiar to us growing up. What's one book that has deeply impacted your personal growth? Again, there are so many. I'm a big fan of self-help books, spiritual books. Gosh, the one that has impacted my life and personal growth, I guess I would have to say A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. I think there are so many books I've read. In fact, there's two. I'm going to say two. The other book that I love, and this is for anybody who's a parent, is The Conscious Parent. I have returned back to that book more times than I can count. And of course, there's no manual for parenting that I ever got, but that book really helped me to understand the type of parent that I wanted to be with my son, and help me along the way. It goes all the way from when your child is little into adolescence. And I remember reading it when my son was little and going, oh God, so much time before we're in those dreaded teenage years. Well, whoa, they came pretty darn quick. So I even pick up that book still to this day. It's just been a staple for me in my parenting journey. And Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, I believe I read when I was 24. It was confusing because I'm like, how in the heck do you live in the moment? And how do you practice being conscious? And what I loved about that book was Oprah had him on and broke down each chapter and asked questions. And it was almost like a book study. And so it really brought it to life. So I love introducing that book to people. And I think she even 10 years later had Eckhart come back and they broke it down chapter by chapter. So I love that book. And honestly, I could probably list a million books, but that one really stands out to me. Okay, last question, really last question. What's something you do today that your younger self would be so incredibly proud of? Well, I have always been drawn to helping people. When I graduated, I wanted to go into a more high needs school when everybody else was trying to get into the highest paying district and the ones with the best parents and the best Christmas gifts. And I wanted to go to a school where I could impact the most amount of change and love and build really beautiful relationships. So I've always wanted to help. And I can remember even when I was younger, when I would see things that didn't make sense to me or where there were things going on in my home, I would always try to get into solution and help out. So I think my younger self would be really proud that we created a career where I just get to help people all day long. And I get to teach and I get to love people and I get to develop these really beautiful lifelong relationships with my clients. I, at this point, cannot even travel anywhere pretty much in the world without knowing somebody because I've worked with so many people. So I think that my younger self would be really proud that I became this and got to do this for a living. So I hope you enjoyed getting to know me a little bit better today. I hope some of the questions that you guys had maybe were presented in today's episode, or maybe you wrote them in and you're listening to get a response. But if you'd ever like to hear another episode like this, I'd love to hear from you. This space is a little bit challenging because you guys are not in my audience going, wait, what did you mean by that? And hold on, what does self-abandonment really mean? So it means a lot when you guys reach out and in very nice ways that, you know, there's more that you'd like to learn or that there's something you would like expanded upon, or if there are specific questions, I am more than happy to answer them. So please feel free to send any questions for a future Ask Robin episode. You can send them through Instagram, email, or wherever you usually connect to me. I will read them all, or my team will read them all. And there's a good chance that your question could be a part of future episodes. And just keep in mind that they're all anonymous, and you might be doing an act of service for someone else. Maybe that question is a question that would benefit another listener. So I did it. I think this was a way longer episode than I anticipated. Okay, I guess I can talk about myself on this podcast. I'm getting better, guys. I'm getting more practice. So until next time, keep growing. Next week, I am going on vacation, and I might even be going off the grid. I am going to Canada, which is a very, very, very special place to me. I have Canadian citizenship. My entire family is from Canada. My mom is still a Canadian citizen. I grew up having a cottage there, and I have this amazing opportunity to go back to the place that I grew up going to, that my dad grew up going to, that my grandmother was born and raised in the town. Her great grandmother came over on a boat from Scotland and died and was the first person buried. So it's a really, really exciting trip. And the Wi-Fi is spotty, which I'm also looking forward to. So I'm going to go off the grid for a week. I'll be back with some new information for you guys. In the meantime, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you for sticking through this and showing up week after week. I see you, I acknowledge you, and you matter to me. I'll see you next time. That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for being here and for doing this work. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Come connect with me over on TikTok at Robin Breckenridge or Instagram at Coach with Robin, where I share even more insights, tools, and conversations around boundaries, self-trust, relational healing, and so much more. And just a quick reminder, this podcast is for educational and personal growth purposes only. The insights and tools I share are based on my experience as a life and relationship coach and are meant for general guidance. Each person's story is unique, and the nuances of individual experiences can't always be addressed in this format. What's shared here may not be applicable to every situation, especially those involving abuse, oppression, severe mental illness, or systematic harm. If you or someone you know is in crisis, please seek support from a qualified mental health professional or emergency resources. Thank you for listening and for showing up for yourself in this way. Take care, and I'll see you next time.